All right, for tonight, we're going to be covering Chapter 6, which is going to be the remaining promulgated forms. Now, let me explain how this is going to basically work. We're going to go through them, is what we're going to end up doing, but it's going to be more based off of the form. So I'm going to put the form online. We're going to talk about the form, go through it, but there's a lot of forms that we're going to be covering this evening. So if you have questions, I'm going to ask everybody to hold it until the end of the class, because what I want to end up doing is I want everybody to hold the questions to the end so that I can end up covering the content, and then we can come back and pull up those forms individually and answer those. So again, even though it's only like 10 slides, we're going to cover probably a ton of different contracts that have a lot of different things. So with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump on over to the slide. Again, like I said, this is the remaining promulgated forms. The very first objective is going to be that we're going to identify the ways in which the other 5 promulgated forms differ from the 1 to 4 family residential resale contract. We will also describe the proper use of the residential condominium contract. We will further describe the proper use for the farm and ranch contract, and we'll describe the proper use for the unimproved property contract, as well as describing the proper use for the new home contract. So as you can see on your slide here, these are the forms that are promulgated by TREC. Okay, so all of those forms that you see here, these are going to end up being the 6 forms that are promulgated. Okay, so these are the 6 promulgated forms by TREC. Again, you have the 1 to 4 family residential contract, which we have already gone through. We did that in the previous class. Okay, so if you were in the previous class, we went through that and actually filled one out. In this class, we're going to focus more on the new home contract, and you're going to see here the difference is one is incomplete and one's complete. Okay, so if a house does not have what's called a certificate of occupancy, so a COO, okay, it is not going to have a completed construction. So if it does not have its COO, it's going to be an incomplete. Okay. We're also going to talk about the farm and ranch contract, the residential condominium contract, which you'll notice also is a resale. Okay. So a resale contract and then a unimproved property contract. So there are multiple types of contracts that you will use. However, the very first one is the one you're going to use probably 90% of the time. 90% of the time, the 1 to 4 family residential resale contract will end up being the contract that you're going to use. Okay. Now, the question is, and what we're going to do this evening, okay, so we're going to go in and we're going to look at these contracts. But the whole point behind this is that is it different from the 1 to 4 family residential contract? So we're going to look at each of these contracts tonight, and what we're going to start off with is the very first one. It's going to be the new home contract, the incomplete construction. Now, if you have 2 screens at home, you may want to split the screens, pull up the contracts like off of TREC, and go in and start looking as we're going through these. But we're going to discuss, with this slide, we're going to discuss paragraphs 2, 7, and 13, as well as the notice on page 8 regarding the Texas Property Code and any construction defects. Okay, so in that particular situation, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to go ahead now and I'm going to pull up the incomplete contract. Give me just a moment here. We're going to pull up both of them. So I'm going to, if I can get it to work, I'm going to move this one over here, and I am going to pull up the 1 to 4 family. All right. We're going to split these 2 here, split them in, and what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break them down in regards to that situation so you can kind of see them both. May work, may not. We're going to go like that. Okay, so this is, like I said, this one right here is going to end up, this is the one you complete on a daily basis. Okay, you're dealing with any type of properties and reselling properties. This is the one on your left-hand screen. The left is going to end up being the, it's going to be an example of what you're going to use daily. Okay, on the right is the one that's going to be different. Okay, now what you'll notice here, and one thing that I want you to see, and I wish I could kind of just zoom this in just a tad. Let's see here, so y'all can both kind of see it. There we go. All right, so what you'll see here is if you look at the first paragraph, pretty simple here. Okay, everything looks the similar thing. But the thing that you're going to notice is look at paragraph 2 here versus paragraph 2 here. What do you see? What do you notice, Mr. Nobles, is the difference here?
A whole lot more stuff in that one, like A, B, C, D, and E, and that don't have A.
Yeah, so if we look at this, we actually go through this and look, we're in incomplete construction, okay? So if you notice, the property A looks the same so far, right? You look at A to this, looks almost identical. But what you'll notice here, though, is that at the or as described in exhibit, attached exhibit, together with improvements, fixtures, and all other and so forth. Well, what you'll notice here is that we don't really have improvements or accessories, okay? We truthfully, yes, we have our lot and block, we have our land, but what ends up happening, we don't yet know what improvements or fixtures and all are going to be included with it. We have no idea, because Mr. Travis may be building himself a house. He may be building a house, but he doesn't know if he's going to put a chandelier in. He doesn't know if he's going to even have one completed. He may have, Travis may say, I want a shell. Build me a shell and I'll do the rest. Well, if we do that, then if we use this contract, he's not going to have mirrors, ceiling fans, mailboxes. He's not going to have all that stuff. He may just have 4 walls and nothing inside. Okay? So in that particular situation is, understand that we have to make certain that we see these differences. Okay? It's going to be very key that you space between 2 here on the 1 to 4 family versus 2 over here on the incomplete construction. You have to be able to differentiate. Now, I will tell you, for example, okay, on the exam, they will actually ask you on the state exam, what paragraphs is different, what paragraphs in the new home incomplete construction is different from the 1 to 4 family. You need to be able to immediately spot paragraph, the first one is paragraph number 2. Okay, it's going to be very key in that situation because the fact is we're not 100% certain. Okay, now I want to move this over so I can kind of reference it on my side here. All right, so what we need to end up doing is you'll also in this same situation, we have to be able to differentiate between the other matters that are going to be separate. Okay, they're going to be different ones that are ultimately going to be separate. So let me see here, because of course, while you're teaching, computers don't like to work with you. So of course, give me a minute while I go back. Okay. Here we go. All right, so the other one that we want to look at, okay, is we want to look over here at paragraph 7. Okay, I'm going to scroll down here, paragraph 7. There's part of paragraph 7. Let me move to there. Move this to paragraph 7. And if we look here, what do you notice is missing immediately in paragraph 7? The most important part that's missing.
Seller's disclosure.
Seller's disclosure. The seller's disclosure is completely not even there. It's gone. You look over here onto the onto this one, onto the 1 to 4 family. There it is, clear as day. Okay, but over here, B is construction documents. Okay, so the next paragraph that you're going to notice that's going to be different is going to be 7. So right now, paragraph 2 and paragraph 7 are going to be the ones that are different from the 1 to 4 family. The reason being is, Mr. Grossman, let me ask you actually, sir, what exactly would be the reason that a seller's disclosure is not going to be on an incomplete construction home?
Because nobody's owned the property, so there can't be a disclosure on anything.
That's exactly right. If Miss Linda is purchasing a house that has not been built, she's not lived in it, Miss Linda, are you going to have anything to write about that property? No, nobody knows. Okay, so in that situation, you're not going to have a seller's disclosure. Okay, now here's a question. We'll talk about this in a second. Does a seller's disclosure, what do you think? I'm not going to answer it, but do you think that a seller's disclosure must be utilized on a new construction home, a completed construction home? You don't have to answer that. I want you to think about that. Okay, because when we get to that question, that's something you need to know. This one is completely not done. Okay, it's incomplete. The other one is going to be completed. Okay, so you got to be able to look at those two in that situation. You'll also notice that the access and utilities, A, is completely different from this A up here. Okay, the reason being is guess what? They may not have full utilities at the time of this contract. Okay, so they can't turn on the stuff. You look down at, like we said, you have construction documents. The construction documents, again, these are items that have to be able to be cleared as well. There also might be what's called cost adjustments. In real estate, guys and gals, I'm going to tell you something. In real estate, it's one of those industries, especially if you're building a new house, that things are not going to be perfect. Okay? So, for example, Mr. Eugene, Miss Linda walks in, they sit down at my desk, they say, we want to build a brand new house. Come on in, Mr. Eugene, Miss Linda. Let me go through and let me, sit here and let's go through all the documents. We go through all the documents and everything. And Miss Linda and Mr. Eugene, we come to an agreement that their new house is going to cost them $320,000. Okay? Now, if they're purchasing a house for $320,000, Mr. Stahl, I got a question for you. As we are building that house, is that house going to stay at $320,000 as we're moving through the construction phase? No, what happens? What could end up happening? Lumber could do what in the middle of construction?
It all fall apart.
Well, it could go. The prices could go through the roof, right? And if the prices go through the roof, what happens? Their price to their house goes what? Through the roof too. Okay. So in these situations, you'll see this part right here about cost adjustments. All change orders must be in writing. Increases in cost resulting from change orders or items selected by the buyer, which exceed the allowances specified in the construction documents, will be paid by the buyer as follows. Okay, so in that situation, when you're purchasing a house, guess what? There can be changes. Or, especially, it just happens a lot of times, a lady finds something that she's walking around at Home Depot, or she may have found it at Lowe's. She's walking around, and she's like, oh my gosh, wouldn't this glass, Mr. Eugene, look so nice? This mirror would be pretty in my new bathroom. Well, and Eugene says, well, Miss Linda, we already allowed them $400 for a mirror. Well, but this one's $1,200, and it would look so much prettier. Well, guess what? That's right. So what happens there is that now Miss Nobles ends up, she now goes, she wants to increase. She wants this particular mirror in there. So Miss Linda would go in and there would be a cost increase. Okay? That's why I tell people all the time. When a builder is out there marketing their company, their homes, they're going to have the nice home. They're not going to build a cheapo home. Okay, you think about it. When you go and you want to go look at homes, they're not going to build a spec home. And what I mean by spec home is it's a home that can be shown. Okay, it's a walkthrough home. They're not going to build a spec home that's the cheapest of the cheapest. Because when you walk in there, what are you going to do, Mr. Grossman? When you walk into a cheapo home just looks really cheap, what are you going to do, Mr. Grossman? You want to buy that?
Walk back out.
You're going to walk back out because you're going to be like, no, that's just 4 walls. I don't want that. But if you go in and say, for example, that Mr. Jacob builds this nice, huge house, people want to come in there and look at it. He does that because of what? He wants to entice you to come into his brand new house. So he comes into the property, or you come into the property, and what's he going to do? He's going to upsell you. He's going to upsell you. Because he's going to tell you, oh, so you've been to so-and-so down the street, you've been to Mr. Darren's home down the street. Yeah, that's the basic plain Jane home. I build quality homes. Look at my home, and we are custom. We can make it any way you want it to be. Well, if it's custom, what does that mean? It's just like you can go out to some actually automotive places, you can have cars custom built to what you want it to be. You can have the leather seats put in, you can end up having different colors put in, you can do a bunch of different things if you end up, you use custom. But if you do custom, Mr. Eugene, is it going to be cheaper or more expensive if you use custom? Why is it going to be more expensive?
Because you customize, you're going higher.
You're going your way, right?
Yeah.
Now, what's the problem if, say, Mr. Grossman hires Mr. Jacob to build a custom home for him, and he likes gaming? So he builds, instead of a, like 4-bedroom house, he builds a 3-bedroom with a huge gaming room. What's the problem, though, with that? That's right. Mr. Grossman may love gaming. He may love it. That house fits him. But now he wants to sell it and move on. What happens? His audience, his buyers, is going to be very few. Okay? So that's why you got to be careful with customs. I've seen custom houses that are beautiful, beautiful. Builders did a wonderful job, wonderful job. But in the same situation as they built it, it was so custom to that person that it ended up no other buyer wanted to purchase it. And if they did want to purchase it, they wanted to gut it and redo it from the beginning. Okay? You got to be careful when you're dealing with these things. And these are things that go along in the contract that you got to be aware of. Okay? Because when you're sitting here and you're talking about these cost adjustments, I've represented many buyers in purchases with a builder. And I had to sit down and I had to explain to them, Mr. Keith, you're wanting to purchase this home. By all means, get the home you want. I'm here to help you. But Mr. Keith, I want you to be aware of something. This cost adjustment line is very key, because as you're shopping or you're going around Lowe's and they've already painted the whole house and you decide that you don't like that color and you want it repainted, they don't do that for free. You got to pay for it. Okay? It's not something that you get to go in and they paint it once and they're like, yeah, I don't like that. I want you to go in and change it off. Okay? It doesn't work like that. Okay? So you need to be aware of it. Also, you've got things like we said about buyer selections, the completion date. Again, with completion dates, do you think that it is possible, for example, in real estate, if I'm selling a home that's already built, say that I'm selling Mr. Garrett's property that's already been built, okay? Can I shoot really close to when we're most likely going to close on that house most of the time? Yeah, most of the time, because the house is there. Okay? My next question is, talk about it incomplete. Can I control, or do I have control, Mr. Grossman, of the weather? Can I control the weather and make it rain, make it snow, all that? Can I do that? No, I have no control over it. Wish I could, right? So in that situation is, in that particular element, okay, what happens if I had control to the weather? Texas would be like kind of on a organized pattern, but Linda's got control, and that's why it's so.
Keep moving
So
on. She didn't want to have a meeting tomorrow.
that's what it was. But so what ends up happening, though, like I said, moving back to this, is that you have the completion. And so what happens is, as you can see, is the seller must commence construction no later than. So he's got to start, he or she has to start construction at a certain time, okay? But we want to try to shoot for a certain date. But here's the thing. Mr. Eugene, you work in a field where y'all have to have certain jobs completed by a certain time. Have you ever in your entire life, how many times in your life would you say y'all shoot for a certain date and you miss it because of some weather or some issue pops up? It happens like once a year, right? Or once every
Like
50 years?
Sometimes.
Right, because there's never no issues, right?
You
Uh-huh.
always got issues on everything.
There's always issues.
Especially rush jobs.
That's right. So in this situation is you've got to be realistic. You got to tell your clients. Because see, here's what your clients do. When a client reads a contract and they see this date and completion, they don't think about real world stuff. They don't think about, oh, it's going to rain, or it may a tornado may come through, or it may snow in Bryan College Station.
That'll never happen.
That don't ever happen in this world, right? Well, guess what? It's doing it. Okay. So in that particular situation, like I tell people, is that you have to be aware of when you talk about these completions, these are estimates. These are estimates. Things can change. Life can change. Okay. We know that. So what ends up happening in these particular elements is we have to make certain, by all means, that we educate our clients and keep them up to date on these different contracts. See, guys and gals, I've been in this industry long enough that I can tell you this is exactly how they do, okay? It's sad that it's this way, but what happens is, in real life, a client, when you send them an offer for them to sign, you think they read it? It's sad that it's this way because here's what it is. I would say about 90% of the time I send a contract and I get it back within seconds. There's no way you could read that contract. Now, of course, my duty and my job is to write the best terms. But I would rather a client go through the contract with a fine-tooth comb to do what? Just to make sure they understand it and they can ask me questions. Y'all, I will email a client and tell a client, okay, I want you to read through this with a fine-tooth comb. I want you to be aware of these things. I want you to understand it. Okay, yeah, I'll do it. Click, 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 signed. The problem is with this, guys and gals, is if your clients aren't reading the contract, they don't understand the material. They have no idea. Whew, over their head. Okay? It is your duty, your obligation to ensure that the client is reading the stuff and you're also making certain that you have everything taken care of for their benefit. Okay? Now, moving along to our next section that we're going to talk about. We're going to jump over here to 13. Okay? Now you'll notice, and we're going to spend some time here, okay, on this. Later, towards the end of class, we're actually going to spend time on this. But I actually want to take a moment here, and Miss Linda, I would like you to speak a little loud, but I would like you to read. If you can't, please come up here so you can see it. I would like you to read, madam. Actually, you know what, Miss Linda, I'm not going to let you do that because I've got two professors in the back that are learning. Mr. Grossman and Mr. Stahl, can you read? Can y'all see it first off? Okay. Mr. Stahl, can you read the first over here on this side, the paragraph 13A on the incomplete contract out loud for everybody?
All right. Prorations, taxes for the current year, maintenance fees, assessments, dues, and rents will be prorated through the closing date. The tax proration may be calculated, taking into consideration any change in exemptions that will affect the current year's taxes. If taxes for the current year vary from the amount prorated at closing, the parties shall adjust the prorations when tax statements for the current year are available. If taxes are not paid at or prior to closing, buyer will be obligated to pay taxes for the current year.
Excellent. Mr. Grossman, read B.
Rollback taxes if additional taxes, penalties, or interest assessments are imposed because of seller's use or change in use of the property prior to closing. The assessments will be the obligation of seller. Obligations imposed by this paragraph will survive closing.
So as you see, thank you, gentlemen. As you see in this situation, one is talking about prorations, and this is that one like we talked before. The person that owns the property, if say that Miss Leela, she owns the property, January through June, and Mr. Eugene and Miss Linda, y'all purchase it from Miss Leila, and y'all purchase it right at the 6-month mark, and you take it to December, Miss Leila will pay for January through June, and y'all will pay for it July through December. That's proration, okay? And that is your obligation. You have to pay for your time frame that you have. Under the rollback taxes, if there happen to be any additional taxes outside of what we've already talked about, through either penalties, interest, that are actually going to be imposed on that property, then it's now, if it's been used by the seller's use or its change in use of the property prior to closing, then those taxes will be the obligation of the seller. Okay. Now, you'll notice, however, over at 13 on the 1 to 4, it's simple. Okay. In this situation, whoever uses it pays for it. You use it for 4 months and 2 days, you pay for it for 4 months and 2 days. The buyer pays for the remainder. However, over here, under prorations on an incomplete, the taxes of the current year, along with their maintenance, assessments, dues, rent, all of this stuff is going to be prorated, okay, which is normal. But what's going to end up happening in that situation is, if the taxes are not paid at or prior to the closing, then guess what? There is no other change. It's the buyer's obligation. There is no seller. It's the buyer. Okay? So when we're looking at these, you have to read through these different contracts. And it is your duty to be able to explain these to your client. It is your obligation to read through these. Then, one last one on this one. Let me find it right here real quick. Notice here, the difference is right here before you look up here, here's all the information, consult an attorney, but look right here. You go right to there, look at this part right here versus here. This contract is subject to Chapter 27 of the Texas Property Code. The provisions of that chapter may affect your right to recover damages arising from a construction defect. If you have a complaint concerning a construction defect and the defect has not, has not been corrected, as may be required by law or by contract, you must provide the notice required by Chapter 27 of the Texas Property Code to the contractor by certified mail, return receipt, no later than the 60th day before the date you filed the suit to recover damages in a court of law or initiate arbitration. The notice must refer to Chapter 27 of the Texas Property Code and must describe the construction defect. If requested by the contractor, you must provide the contractor an opportunity to inspect and cure the defect as provided by Section 27.004 of the Texas Property Code. This provision is very important, but it only applies to construction homes. It does not apply to a resale, because after the person has resold the home, that person has resided in that home, it is now that person's obligation. I have had clients before who have built a home, okay, who have ended up built a home and then turn around a few months later and sell that home. Okay, not a wise move, because you actually end up, you're outside of that 1-year warranty sometimes, and sometimes those warranties are not transferable. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. All right, now that covers basically, so if you want to take notes, you want to put this down if you don't have it. The paragraphs that are going to be different. Oh, and one other, hold on just a minute. Sorry. Nope, that was it. Yes. Yes, you'll notice. No, that was it. That's right. That was it. Okay. Yes. So you will end up, you'll noticing paragraph 2, 7, 13, and on page 8 where they sign, those are going to be your differences. Okay. So that's page 2, 7, 13, and that little signature part are going to be your differences from the 1 to 4 family to the new home construction incomplete. However, everything else is completely the same. So if you understand everything from the contract, the only differences is 2, 7, 13, and the signature page. Real simple. Okay, everything else runs the same. All right. Now, let's go to our next one. Move this over here. We want to go to now our completed construction. Move this back up to the top. Okay, and okay, here's your completed. So this is going to be a home that is 100% completed. Okay. Again, Mr. Eugene, what do you notice about paragraph 2?
It's different than the other one.
It's still different.
It still is.
Okay. Now don't get this confused. A lot of people will say, but that looks similar to the incomplete. Well, yeah, probably. Okay. They're about new home constructions. Okay. One's incomplete, one's incomplete. Okay. But again, we're basing this off of the 1 to 4 family to the new home. Okay. Now, again, let's move down here to 7. Back down here over here to 7. And looky here. We don't have construction documents for B on this one. We have acceptance of property condition as is. Now, isn't that something? Okay? Means that the present condition of the property with any and all defects and without warranty, except for the warranties of title and the warranties of this contract, buyer's agreement to accept the property as is under paragraph 7B1 or 2 does not preclude the buyer, though, from inspecting the property under 7A, from the negotiating repairs or treatments in a subsequent amendment, or from terminating this contract during the option period, if any. Okay? Now, let me explain something here. Mr. Stahl goes out and he builds a house that is a new build, final complete construction home. And Mr. Stahl lets that property sit for 5 years. He's marketed it, but nobody's been in it. It's finally completed, but nobody's lived in it. Mr. Stahl, do you need a seller's contract? Seller's disclosure. I'm sorry, seller's disclosure.
I would say no.
Okay, Mr. Grossman?
Yeah, you probably would. So
we have a yes. Miss Linda?
Yes.
Mr. Eugene? Yep. Mr. Stahl, you're right.
It seems like you would, because things could have gone wrong, but at the same time, nobody's been in the house. So
That's correct.
right.
The key thing is that no one has actually lived in that house. And if nobody has lived in that house, we don't have a seller's disclosure. Okay? However, that's why we have this part here, that acceptance is based off of as is condition. Okay? Meaning that Mr. Stahl, he's got a home that's been sitting for 5 years. There could be any million reasons why it sat. I've seen houses sit for a long time. Home sits for a long time. Mr. Stahl turns around and he says, you know what? I need to go ahead and I finally got an offer on it. He's going to be selling the property as is, period. Okay? But here's the thing. It is the buyer's obligation to get an inspection. It's the buyer's obligation to get an inspection, period. I cannot enhance or harp on that enough. It is your duty as a real estate agent to ensure that your clients get an inspection. Let me say that again. It is your duty as real estate agents to make certain that your buyers get an inspection on any house. But wait a minute, Mr. Knowles, wait a minute. You're telling me even if Mr. Eugene built a house and immediately once it got its occupancy, I still need an inspection? Yeah.
what if you don't build too good?
That's right. What if you don't build too good? Exactly. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, Mr. Eugene might have got Mr. Grossman to turn around and purchase one of his houses, and Mr. Grossman gets there and he notices that when he walks in on the second floor and his leg goes through the deal. See, Mr. Grossman, you want that house? No. Or he might have ended up, he plumbed it with water hose for outside. He took a long water hose and just ran them through the walls for you. What you think, Mr. Grossman?
I don't know why you would do that.
Well, he's trying to save money.
I still don't understand why you would do that.
Some people do crazy things. Trust me. Trust me.
Water hose is cheaper.
Yeah, water hose is a lot cheaper than PVC. Okay? But the key thing in this situation is you always get your house inspected. Doesn't matter if it's brand new or not. Homes need to be inspected. You got to understand, in this industry, for example, Miss Linda, she may have a degree, a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate in construction. She knows everything about building a house, inside, upside down, around. But Mr. Stahl, I got a question for you. If she's got all that education, do you think she's the one that's out there hammering the nail into the wood?
No.
No. She's not going to do that. She's going to go over, and what's she going to end up doing? She's going to go get Mr. Eugene, who still don't know how to hammer, the nail in. So he's over here and he's doing a crappy job, and all of a sudden, guess what happens? Her name may be on it, but the house may be in horrible condition. Horrible. Okay? So you always, guys and gals, you want a house inspected. Okay? Because I will tell you, I know this for a fact. There are what's called A, B, and C, and some even go D and F vendors. Okay? An A vendor, if you have all A vendors, your house is going to blow past inspection, no problem. Okay? You can put that house up to any inspector, and they're going to make that thing perfect. Okay? You get a B inspector in there, and they're going to end up, so that they feel good about themselves, they're going to try to find something, even if that means they need to make something happen. Okay? You get a C inspector in there, they have no education whatsoever, and they're going to go over here, and they're going to pass a house that should not pass. Same thing happens in regards to builders. You get an electrician. They can be a C electrician that ends up using very cheap material. You use cheap wiring, what happens to it, Mr. Eugene? You put cheap wiring through the whole house, what can happen?
It can disintegrate, or it can lose its.
And a lot of things can happen, right? It can wear out quicker. You get to rewire the house. Yeah. Guys, I'm not joking with you. When you get into real estate, I'm not going to joke with you. I always get all these little, I'm in a group where we, as real estate agents, take pictures of the most strangest things that we've ever seen. Okay? And there was a picture that I saw that an electrician, a woman ended up, she likes to do her hair in the bathroom. Okay? Well, there's no spot for her to put a power cord into the deal, into the wall. So guess where they end up putting it? They put it in the sink. They actually cut into the sink and put the power plug. Now, Miss Linda, what's the problem if you do that?
Shocked.
Something on that.
And you turn on that water, and you go plug that thing in, what's going to happen, Miss Linda?
You ain't gonna be living.
That's right.
You get charged out there.
So it's your, and like I said, if I can find some of them pictures, I got plenty of them. I'll send y'all a couple. But there are some very crazy things that you'll see. There's plenty of different crazy things. So it's imperative that while the property has to be sold as is, the property has to and needs to be inspected. Now, what if, Mr. Stahl, your real estate agent, Mr. Keith comes to you, and Mr. Keith says, Mr. Stahl, I want you to end up, sir, I want you to put an offer in on this brand new built property that Mr. Garrett has built. And he said, okay, I'll be more than glad to do that for you, Mr. Keith. And he says, but, I want you to know something, Mr. Garrett. Mr. Travis. I don't want an inspection. I trust Mr. Garrett. He's a great guy. I know him. I've bought houses from him, but I do not want an inspection, and I don't want you to try to sell it to me. What do you think you do? What you do is this, okay? Miss Linda, you remember? They refuse inspections, and they will not get an inspector. What do?
You have to get an amendment.
Oh.
Addendum.
You get a form. There's a notice that Mr. Keith needs to fill out. And it says on there, there's an X that says, I have been notified by Travis Stahl of Nobles Realty Group that I should get an inspection. However, I have chosen not, there's a box, to have an inspection on the property. Mr. Keith must sign it. When Mr. Keith signs it, where did the liability now go to?
It's all on him now.
It's now all on Mr. Keith, and it's no longer going to end up being on the agent or the brokerage.
And what is that form called?
It is notice of inspection requirement. Now I can show you that at another time. Okay? But again, it is imperative that you end up. Another thing I want to say, this is a sidebar here, okay? By all means, well, let me actually just ask this. Mr. Grossman here, sir. Your client is building a house, for example, okay? Client's building a home. I'm the builder coming in. I've got my people building and all. Come to you, Mr. Grossman, and I tell you, you're representing Miss Linda here. And I tell you, Mr. Grossman, can you go through the house with your client and mark all of the issues throughout the house? Here's blue tape. Have Miss Linda go around and mark all the areas. Okay? Miss Linda goes through the house. She marks all the areas. I go in and I fix about 50% of them. Okay? On your final walkthrough, you notice that 50% of those items have not been fixed. Mr. Grossman contacts me and says, Mr. Nobles, I end up, your client, you said you're going to fix this for my client, and only half of them have gotten fixed. Where's the rest of them? I tell you, well, Mr. Grossman, you see here, I've been real busy and everything, got a lot going on. I'll fix them after closing. Okay? Do you still close on that property, Mr. Grossman? Why not?
Because the terms haven't been fulfilled.
But your client, Miss Linda, has no other place to go, and it may take me a week before I can fulfill it.
It's too bad. Somebody screwed up.
But Miss Linda has no place. Your client has no place to go.
We got a nice office. There's a nice closet that has all the ladders, chairs in it.
What ends up happening here is that you end up, you're right, Mr. Grossman, you do not, in any shape or form, do you ever end up closing a home until those repairs have been made. Okay? The only exception is this, is if there is an amendment that all parties have signed
Agreed to.
and they have agreed to a certain date to them to be fulfilled. In that particular situation, you can sign and you can close. The reason being is Miss Linda, if she has that amendment, and Miss Linda, I don't fix them, say in 2 weeks like I promised, what can you now do, Miss Linda?
I can go back onto that.
You can come back after me, right? And what are you going to do to me?
I'll sue.
You're going to file suit against me to have it fixed. Okay? That's how this works. Okay? So very key in these situations, while you're not going to know every single element, this is just some of them that you need to be aware of.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Miss Linda.
For instance, you purchase a house
Yes, ma'am.
and you do the inspection.
Mhm.
And then a year later, you want to go ahead. I know it's not wise to move again in a year's time.
Uh-huh.
Do you have to go ahead and have another inspection, or how long is those inspections good for?
Well,
Or to the codes of
okay, so
states?
inspections don't ever deal with codes.
Okay.
And another thing is a lot of people get this wrong too with inspections. They'll say, well, we need to get an inspector out to see if it passes or fails. There's no such thing as pass, fail in inspections. Inspection is, we simply show compliance or non-compliance. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So we look for compliance or deficiency. So for example, in a kitchen, kitchens are supposed to have GFCI receptacles.
Right.
Okay? They do not have a GFCI receptacle. It is classified as deficient. Does not mean that it doesn't work. It just means it does not comply with the current standards, if that makes sense.
And that's usually in bathrooms too.
Bathrooms as well. So when we talk inspections, you can tell an experienced agent versus a novice agent, because the fact is that they will say, well, I need to get an inspector out to see if it passes or fails. Okay? There's no such thing. It is either compliant or deficient. Okay? And you want to know those differences, because there will be times that you will see those and they end up, you want to kind of be able to differentiate between the two so you see. Okay? But very good question there. But in regards to your inspection, the inspection is sometimes, some people say 6 months, some people say a year. But again, you got to look at it as how much is it utilized. Okay? For example, it's like carpet. If I put brand new carpet down in a house that has very little traffic, how long is that carpet going to last?
It'll last a little longer.
Maybe 5, 10 years, maybe. But if I put that same carpet in a house or in an office that has a ton of people walking through it every single day, how long is that carpet going to last?
Not half the time.
Half the time. So in that situation, you have to be able to differentiate between the two so that you have an understanding. Okay? Same concept. You go into a house and the person, it's just a little old lady that's purchasing a house, and she only uses the downstairs, and it's a 2-story home, and she just stays in 2 little rooms in her house. Well, in that situation, if she stays in 2 little rooms in her house, she probably is not going to mess much with the inspection. But if you have a family of 10 people in a house, what happens there?
It's going to be used a lot.
It's going to be used like that. And I mean a lot. Okay? And there's going to be issues because what happens? Especially younger kids like to do what? They like to explore through the house. And as they explore through the house, what do? Tear up things. Kind of like Mr. Grossman. He probably still goes and licks the fork and sticks it in the outlet. Okay? Has it worked yet?
No.
No? Dang. Mr. Stahl, have yours worked yet?
I keep trying. Nothing happened.
Nothing yet?
Yeah.
Maybe Miss Linda, y'all can take her. She can kind of show you. I hear she's experienced.
My grandfather has one leg. Never mind.
But again, in that situation is, but yes, it depends. It really comes down to a case by case. And then of course, 13, and you'll notice as we go through this, same thing with 13 like the previous one, rollback and prorations. Okay, so, and again, one other thing, like we talked about, this provision right here, the contract is also different. Okay, very similar to the previous one that we just spoke about. Okay. All right. Now we're getting into some good stuff because I get a lot of people that get confused on these, and these are some pretty good areas to get into. I'm going to go right here to the farm and ranch contract. All right. So let's talk about the farm and ranch. Now, of course, there's going to be some differences here. Okay. Again, you can see immediately right off the bat, look at 2 versus 2. Ms. Linda, what do you notice that are different between the 1 to 4 family and the farm and ranch on paragraph 2?
Sorry.
So in that situation is, if you notice, we have land, improvements, and accessories, but notice the accessories on the 1 to 4 family. Number 2C deals more with like window air conditioning units, that fireplace screen, Mr. Stahl, that you've been wanting to take with you, that wiring, not wiring, the swimming pool equipment. All of these things in this situation are a typical residential home, okay, typical subdivision type home. But if you notice on the farm and ranch, you'll notice that accessories are talking about what? Farm and ranch accessories, farm and ranch equipment, okay? So in dealing with this, that's one thing that you have to notice, okay? When we're talking about farm and ranch, are we talking about a house that may have just a few acres? What happens in this situation if Mr. Jacob, say for example, he is selling his house and he lives on 5 acres? He has a house, he's got a pool, he's got 5 acres, he has, maybe he has some chickens or something running around. Well, the question now becomes, which of these two forms do I use? Because here's the thing. If you notice over here, we have residential accessories, but we also have farm and ranch accessories. Okay? So we have this, but here's the thing, and this is what I tell everybody in this situation, okay? The farm and ranch is a great form. It's perfect. It's wonderful. I like to use it when my lender tells me, okay? And this is very key in this situation. A lot of people get this confused, okay? Lenders can be great. By all means, they can be wonderful. But I have had this happen. I've had this happen many times in my career. A client ends up, they wanted to use Quicken Loans, okay? I'm not hating on Quicken Loans. I'm just telling you, every time I've dealt with Quicken Loans, it has been a nightmare, okay? Just been a nightmare. What happens is these forms, that there is a house that ends up where it could fall under either one of these forms, because you will get that in especially Bryan College Station, okay? And sometimes even in Houston and Austin, okay? But you will get it specifically in Bryan College Station area, because there's a lot of properties that are situated on like 5, 10 acre tracts that the lender needs the 1 to 4 family, and they don't want the farm and ranch. Because if they get the farm and ranch form, it's a completely different type of loan, and now they got to get all these other things. So what happened is, like I tell people all the time, is when an agent asks me, which form do I need to use for this particular house, I always tell my agent this: have your client or you contact the lender and ask the lender. If the lender is experienced, the lender will tell you exactly which one it is. If the lender is novice, has no experience at all, they may tell you, complete this farm and ranch contract. You complete it, get halfway through out of options and everything to find out that this contract is not valid, and you got to go submit a 1 to 4 family contract. Okay? And if that occurs, what happens here, and I had this occur before, if this contract is no good, we have to do a 1 to 4 family, we have to get rid of this contract, we have to do a novation, delete this contract out, which means all terms in this contract have done what? Contract's dead on its face. Now I got to redraft this, and if I'm out of options on this, I have to renegotiate options here, and it can be a big mess, and the transaction falls apart, and then your client may end up getting sued. So again, one of the key things is, and I tell people this all the time, is when dealing with these situations, when going through this, you always, number one, you want to make certain that you use, that's why I tell people all the time, you want to use lenders that, of course, when looking at this, clients want to they want to get the best rate. Understand that. 99% of the time, Quicken Loans, Rocket Mortgage, they give them the best rate. However, the chances of them actually closing it are very slim. Okay? What they do is they'll get your client under contract, they end up halfway through, can't get it, they'll refer it out to one of their other companies or subsidiary companies with a little bit higher interest rate, and they end up getting the money back that away. Okay? But the key thing in this situation is, whoever you're dealing with, you want to make certain that your lenders are knowledgeable. Because if they're not knowledgeable, or they're a one-man show, I've had that happen before. We had submitted a contract exactly like this. I'm giving you a real-life situation that one of my team members had dealt with. We submitted a 1 to 4, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. There we go. We were dealing with a farm and ranch contract. Okay, lender told us to use a farm and ranch contract. The client chose this particular lender. Okay, client chose a particular lender. Lender told us they want a farm and ranch. We drafted the farm and ranch. Everybody signed it. We sent it to the lender. Lender got it, started processing it. We did our inspections and everything. Turned around. Lender came back after inspections and said, oh, yeah, we don't need that contract. We need a 1-4 family. So I had to terminate this one. Luckily, I was able to save the deal, have them agree to redraft this 1-4, okay, with new terms. Ended up, we drafted over the 1-4 family, kept the transaction going, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, the lender just disappeared in the middle of the transaction because the lender ended up could not get the loan to happen, and since they couldn't get the loan to happen, guess what happened? They ended up just MIA. So that's kind of a sidebar situation. If you can't end up, they always say this, if you can't hug or slap your lender, they're too far away. Okay? Because the thing is like I said, with Quicken Loans, Mr. Grossman, where do you, or not Mr. Grossman, Mr. Hall, where do you think Quicken Loans people are at? Think they're in College Station, Texas? No, where are they at? Probably way up north in Washington, D.C. or something. Okay? So all they have to do if they screw something up is, well, I'll just stop answering the phone calls. I don't have to worry about Mr. Stahl coming to see me because he ain't coming up here. So I just killed a deal. And then their client gets sued. Okay? So it's very important when going through these and talking about these, that's why I come back to this all the time, is that you want to make certain, how do I know which document to use? It comes back to, it's a 50-50 shot. Okay, it's a 50-50 shot. You have to ensure that when you're looking at these, like I said, this farm and ranch, did it not have C2? Say C2 was not here, this would be easy. We know for a fact, I only use it for farm and ranch. That's all it's used for, period. Okay, but because it has C2, any property that ends up, that turns around and ends up having a house on it, can technically be farm and ranch. Okay? Now here's another thing here. You'll see here in a little bit, farm and ranch and unimproved property sometimes get confused too. So what happens is, 1-4 family, that's easy. 1-4 family, I go over there, I know it's a subdivision. Subdivision loans always going to use 1-4 family. But what happens if there's a building, a structure that's on the property, and said structure is basically people live in it, but it's really not able to have occupants in it. Okay? Well, in that particular situation it has a building on it, it has a house, but some people could call that a barn and classify it as a farm and ranch contract. Others may say it's uninhabitable, and since it's uninhabitable, it's an unimproved contract. Okay? Again, now what do? What do you think you do now in that situation?
Just cry.
Just cry. You got to go call the lender and say, hey, Mr. Lender, which one do you want me to use? Which one works best? Okay? Because in the situation it can get very confusing very, very quickly. Okay? And I can tell you guys, the worst thing you want to do, I remember that day with one of my agents. Poor guy, he called and he called and he called and he called that lender, he emailed and he texted and he called their corporate office. And nobody would answer the phone. Nobody would answer the phone. And had that agent not been nice, okay, and the clients being nice, they could have sued him for specific performance and forced him to purchase the property because of the fact the lender that they chose was horrible. Okay? So it's imperative that as a real estate agent, you advise clients of these things. You may not see this happen very often, but can it happen? Yeah, it does. Okay? We want the best to happen, but sometimes life doesn't work like that. Okay? Sometimes things do occur to that matter. But again, like I said, we notice that paragraph 2 is different. Now notice here though, this is a little different than the other ones that we just talked about. Look at paragraph 3. Notice something different on paragraph 3 here? Look at that D. The sales price will or will not be adjusted based on the survey required by paragraph 6C. If the seller's price is adjusted, the sales price will be calculated on the basis of blank per acre. If the sales price is adjusted by more than 10%, either party may terminate this contract by providing written notice to the other party within blank days after the terminating party receives the survey. If neither party terminates this contract, or if the variance is 10% or less, the adjustment will be made to the amount in paragraph 3A, B, or proportionately in 3A and B. So guess what? Unlike a residential, if the survey happens to just be more land, you're lucky. Okay? That's why if you're sitting here, if I'm dealing with a property that may end up be classified as farm and ranch, I may want to push it for a 1 to 4 family because of what? I don't want this provision in D if my client's buying it. I may push, no. I don't want a farm and ranch lender. I want a 1 to 4 family. And the reason I'm saying it is because it has accessories of a pool and all of this. So it just happens to have land. And my client's not buying it for farm and ranch reasons. They're buying it for themselves to live in. So they're not going to use it as farm usage. So no, Mr. Lender, I don't want to use this form. I want to use the 1 to 4 family. Okay? Sometimes you got to argue that. I tell people this all the time. The lender is not always going to be your friend, especially the underwriter. Okay? The underwriter is definitely not your friend. So in that situation is you have to make certain that, like I tell people all the time, is you have to have a team. That's why I myself, I love my people that I work with, because the fact is if you get a good team together, you can expedite things very quickly. Okay, you can expedite. But when you bring an outsider in, it's like kind of going to a court. Okay, if you're in a good old boy system and you bring an outsider into that good old boy system, what's going to happen? They're going to squash that person. They don't want that person that's not part of the good old boys coming into their network. Okay, so again, in these situations is we have to be able to differentiate between each one of these different elements. Okay, very key that you understand those different elements here. Okay, now let's look over here though at number 6, paragraph 6.
So I ask, how often do you use a lender that you are not familiar with?
So here
you usually push to use somebody you know, or is it?
Good question on the lender. Okay, it is the buyer. Okay, it's the buyer's choice, by all means. In my office, we try to give at least 3 people, unless for example, if I know one person, for example, Jake, good guy.
Yeah.
Jake and Brenda are my two go-to people. Okay. And sometimes I'll tell my client, get them both. Go to both and get quoted by both. Okay. I can give a client 1, 2, or 3 or more. Best practice is to give them 3, unless you end up, like I always tell my people, here's a lender I prefer, but it is your choice to you take whoever you want. Okay. So, for example, how many people have I used before? It happens, I would say probably about 50-50. What happens, and sometimes if a person has never done this before, they're probably going to end up using the person you refer. Okay. And most of the time, that's great, because what happens is you're able to get the transaction done very quickly. My lenders, most of the time, I've done deals with Jake before, got him out there. We did our little stuff, did appraisals. We got a contract put in, and within about 5 or 6 days, he already had an appraisal back. Just like that. Okay. While when you bring in outside people, say like Quicken Loans, bring them in, they have massive amount of people they're dealing with daily. So what happens is they're not in a rush to get appraisals because they have 4 weeks. They have 30 days to close. So they're just going to put it in a system, and whatever happens, So what? Well, the problem with this is this is one of the key things I tell people is, I would rather an appraisal happen during option, so that if the appraisal comes in low, we're still in option. What can I end up doing? Well, we can lower. I just back out.
Yeah.
It puts the benefit on who? The buyer or the seller? The buyer. But if you bring in a third party that's slow, what ends up happening? Now you're out of your option, and the power's back in whose hands? Back in the seller's hands. So that's kind of why you want to work as a team together. You want everybody working in the same hands, because I've had it before. I've had a person that was selling a property. They were selling the property. They wanted to do one thing. The buyer wanted to do one thing. Their agent was against the seller. The agent and seller didn't get along. The buyer and the agent get along. The lender didn't get along. The appraiser, it was just a big old mess. And when everybody is working against each other, what ends up happening? The entire thing explodes. Okay, it falls apart. So in that situation, is like I tell people all the time in this situation is that as a lender, you want to make certain that you give your preferred people, but it is ultimately your client who makes the decision. I have had plenty times, I'll tell you this, Travis, and I know I'm kind of harping on this, but it's because the lenders have such a big role in it. Okay. I have had a situation where a lender ended up, they wanted Quicken Loans. And I sat down and I explained to them, I don't recommend Quicken Loans. This is the issues that I've had with them. They're horrible people. They're not horrible people, but their system does not flow right. Okay. And I explained that to them. And as I go through that and I explained it to them, my client still told me, I want Quicken Loans. And so I myself, remember, it's not about Justin, it's about my client. I had to pull myself out of it and say, okay, Miss So-and-so, you want to use Quicken Loans. While I may not agree with that, I have done my duty to inform you. Now I'm going to proceed. But I had a duty also to explain to you that there's this issue. Okay. Sure enough, we got two weeks before closing, and we get a letter from Quicken that told us we're apologetic to let you know that unfortunately your property no longer meets our lending standards or something. And so unfortunately we're going to be unable to fund this loan. Thank you. Have a great day. Well, what's the problem here?
2 weeks before, it's after option.
We're 2 weeks before closing, and we're outside of option, and we don't have a justifiable reason on why the lender can't fund, so we can't get a lender's letter to terminate. So now my client is stuck in a situation where their hands is behind their back and they got to buy a house that they can't afford or they can't get loans for, which ends up can turn around and cause a lawsuit. And that's the thing, is it is imperative as an agent that you educate your client on that. But if your client demands, it's just like an inspector too. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not picking on just lenders. It's the same thing with an inspector. You may love one particular inspector. That is your person that your go-to for everything. But if your client says, no, I don't want to use your inspector. I found this guy that will do it for $25 in Dallas. And you got to choose them. But you need to put it in documentation and in writing that you advised them against it. Because as long as I got it in writing and I advised against it and they did it, can't come back on me and say, well, you didn't tell me this. God did tell me. Okay? So it is imperative in these situations that I always tell people is you CYA. You don't know what CYA is, you need to talk. Okay? Miss Linda, you know what CYA is, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I most certainly do.
You're expert in that, right?
Ooh-wee.
So you always CYA, but it is your duty to explain it. Okay, I've had clients that their cousins or their aunts or their uncles or licensed, inspectors or whatever. I can explain all day, but if that's who they want, I have an obligation to work with you. Okay, I've had people before with an inspector before, where the inspector turned around in the same situation. The inspector went over, and in the inspector situation, the client, I told him, I said, we need to get an inspector. Well, my brother's cousin's uncle or something like that is an inspector. And so I want him to come inspect. Well, is he licensed? Yeah, he's licensed. Well, what's his name? Okay, here's his name. I go Google him, because of course I know how to look it up. Go look him up. No such person found. Go over here, go out to the inspection. The guy ends up getting out there. He's getting all over the place. And my favorite ones, I don't know if y'all can see this at home, but my favorite one was he was walking around doing this. Yeah, there's leakage in the wall.
Yes.
Oh,
There was leakage in the wall. Okay? Or he could tell that there was moisture in the wall too by just coming over and doing this, kind of just rubbing on the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool here. Yeah, it's got moisture damage.
Yes.
Okay? The problem with this is if that happens to you, it is your obligation to email them and let the client know that you notice that that person is not licensed and that that individual needs to end up, we really should get a licensed person out. And if they say no, you got it in writing. Okay? So in those situations, like I said, there's reasons for all of these different documents. I know I kind of went off on a tangent there for a second, but it's very imperative information that you know, because as a real estate agent, you're going to run into a lot of different areas. Okay? Now, what we were talking about was number 6 here. Number 6 in this particular situation is, you'll notice that there's a little difference here. Okay? You'll notice when we go through here in regards to our title policy, our commitment, and things to that nature, there is going to be also a difference between your farm and ranch and your 1 to 4 family in paragraph 6. Okay? Again, you'll notice that the title policy here only lists 7 items versus the 8 and 9 that's listed over here. You'll also notice that if you look down here at survey, okay, you have a no survey is required option right here. Okay. You'll also notice that the line for objections is longer than your line over here. You'll also see that title notices, we have exceptions and surface leases before it goes to title notices. And of course, there are going to be a lot of other notices that are included as well through there that are similar. But again, that is going to be your next element. Then of course, you move to title or paragraph 7. And looky here. Looky right here, Miss Linda. Notice, buyers should determine the availability of utilities to the property suitable to satisfy the buyer's needs. It's the buyer's obligation. Okay. One thing I want you to understand here, if you notice as we read through all of these, who is majority of the obligation on? The buyer. The buyer. It's the buyer. It's not the seller. It's the buyer. Okay. It's your obligation as an agent, though, to represent them to the best of your ability, but it ultimately comes down to the buyer. I can tell you in this situation too, just FYI, I have represented clients that have buyer ended up. I did all of my due diligence. I explained it to my buyer, submitted it over to my buyer, and my buyer did not or failed to do their due diligence by reviewing the documents, did not object in time, missed their objection, turned around and tried to come after me, and guess what? Their attorney said, good luck going against him, because he did everything. He followed all of the protocol. He did everything. Your failure as a buyer or seller to not fulfill your duties in this contract doesn't always fall back on the agent. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's something also. But that does not mean as a real estate agent that you get free reign to basically half-aid it, if you know what I'm saying. Okay? It's your duty as a real estate agent to provide quality work. Okay? That's your job. Even if your client ends up texting you 1 billion times a day. Okay? You never in any shape or form go over and put them off. Makes sense. Okay? So again, very imperative in these situations that you know how these work out. Okay. Now, where was the other one here? Give me just a second. Okay, now, so as you go through here, you're going to notice, but look at this right here at E. Look at this part right here. You see that part? You see this part right here? Now, we already talked about this E part right here. Okay? Mr. Eugene, I'm going to test you for a second. On lender required repairs, I'm going to stand up here to block it so you can't see it. Okay? Mr. Eugene, on lender required repairs, who's required in a 1 to 4 family to replace or fix those things? No, sir, not moving.
Hold your face to him.
Let me do this. There we go.
Hands on his chest. Read it on your chest.
Uh-huh.
No, ask the question again. I'm sorry.
So, say you're buying a house
Yes.
from Mr. Jacob,
Yes.
okay? And you're purchasing it from him.
Yes.
And he ends up, you're buying it from him, you go get it inspected, you get Mr. Stahl to inspect it, and he finds 5 things that are wrong with it. The lender, Miss Linda, says these 5 things must be repaired. Whose duty, who has to pay for those repairs? You or Mr. Jacob?
It's one selling. I'm the buyer.
Nobody.
Nobody?
Neither person.
Neither person is obligated under the 1 to 4 family to repair it.
Oh.
Even if your lender, Miss Linda, says one of you need to fix it, the contract says that neither of you have to fix it. But that does not mean that Miss Linda has to fund the loan, though. Do you see how that works? Okay? Because Miss Linda is in control of the money. And if she says it's to be fixed, and you don't fix it, she ain't gonna fix that thing, or she ain't gonna give you the money. Okay? Now, over here, though, look at this on E over here. Completion of repairs on the farm and ranch. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall complete all agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date. Doesn't even get an option. It's the seller. And all required permits must be obtained, and repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed to provide such repairs or treatments, or if no license is required by law, are commercially engaged in the trade of providing such repairs or treatments. At buyer's election, any transferable warranties received by the seller with respect to the repairs will be transferred to the buyer at the buyer's expense. If the seller fails to complete any agreed repairs prior to the closing date, the buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15 or extend the closing date up to 5 days if necessary for the seller to prepare or complete the repairs. So if you notice, over here under 1 to 4 family, nobody has to fix them. But under the farm and ranch, it's the seller's obligation. Yes, Mr. Stahl.
Aren't the 2 paragraphs just flipped?
Huh?
Like E for the farm and ranch is F for the 1 to 4 family, and E for the 1 to 4 family is F for the.
Understood. But look here, though. Do you see how F down here is much larger than the E? You're correct, they are flipped. But do you notice this one over here
It's bigger than
has more option than this E over here?
Okay.
So yes, you are right. But I brought this up here in the situation in regards to, you'll look over here, unless agreed in writing, no other party is obligated to pay for it. But here's the key thing in this situation. This one right here in this situation, you'll see how this one talks about exceeding 5% of the sales price, the buyer may terminate the contract for earnest money. The same thing can apply here. They do have the same situations, but what happens is it's always been in the 1 to 4 family. It's more laxed than in the farm and ranch.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, you are correct. E and F are flipped on both sides. Okay. But it is normally more laxed over here than it is in the farm and ranch. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That's another reason, like I said, if I am working as a buyer, it may be in my best interest to put it over here if there's no repairs as a 1 to 4 family. But if there's a lot of repairs, I may want a farm and ranch because it forces the seller to fix most of the stuff. You see how these work? Okay. Now, the question everybody's asking is, do I have to know all of that stuff? On the test? No. Test no.
Real life, yes.
On the test, you need to know which paragraphs are different. Okay, you need to know which paragraphs are different. You don't need the detail. But in real life, you need to start learning these little things that I'm throwing at you. Okay, that's why one thing I tell students most of the time is the material I'm teaching you right now, I try to teach more of the everyday life. So what? So that you understand it. Okay, so that you can point out these situations, so you can kind of keep that in the back of your head.
Well, which one do you normally, 1 to 4 family is mostly the main,
1 to 4 family, you're going to use about 90% of the time.
but the ranch,
The farm and ranch. So let me just put it this way: 90% of the time you're always going to use farm or use 1 to 4.
Right.
90%. There will be those exclusions, like we talked about earlier, that will sometimes require a farm and ranch, a new construction, an uncompleted one. There's many different things that are there. Understood. But the key thing that you need to know is this. Number one, if you're a newer agent, you need to talk to your broker. Broker will give you some insight. Okay. But if you cannot get a hold of your broker, it is most of the time most beneficial to contact the lender, because the lender is going to be, I can tell you this for a fact. I've dealt with this many times in my life. When I was a new agent and I had to do it on my own, most of it, I'd submit a contract, send it over to the lender, and the lender would look at it and be like, what the hell is this? This ain't what I need. I need a farm and ranch, or vice versa. I need a 1 to 4 family. Or I don't need either. I need an unimproved contract. So then I have to redraft everything. Okay? That's why a lot of times is, and I will tell you this, a lot of new agents will end up, or not new agents, a lot of new lenders, they'll end up, if they ever say, well, that's your job, Mr. Stahl, you should know which one to pick. That's a deflecting question or deflecting answer, because they don't know which one to pick. So they don't want to look stupid, so they want to put it back on Mr. Stahl. So Mr. Stahl goes and does it, and then if it goes south, whose fault is it? It's Mr. Stahl. Okay? So it is imperative in these situations that you understand these particular elements. Okay? Very, very important. But yes, there's a lot of these you'll notice are going to be different. Another one that we're going to look at is going to be in regards to paragraph 13. And again, 13 is very similar to the other one. Again, dealing with prorations and rowbacks. So the ones that are different for your farm and ranch, paragraph 2, 3, 6, 7, and 13. Okay? Those are going to be your differences. Now, next one. I don't even know why they use this one, but we're going to use it anyway. Which I could kind of see this just from practicing over time. What's a condominium, by the way? It's a condominium. Anybody know?
A condo.
A condo. But do you own anything in a condominium?
Own the airspace between walls.
Well, in a condominium unit, you own, if you look at 2 right here, you own the unit in a building, but it's in a condominium project. Okay? So in this situation is, you're going to see that you're noticing that number 1 over here on condominium is a condominium unit, but Mr. Eugene over here, what's A, 2A? What's that word say?
Land.
Land.
Do you see that over here anywhere?
I sure don't.
No, you don't. So do you own any of the land in a condominium?
Nope.
Not at all. Not at all. Okay? So in that situation, you do not actually own the land, you just own the unit. That's it. Okay? So it's very key in this situation. Now, I want you to read, if you can, see those little bitty, tiny, tiny little words right above the residential condominium contract resale? See, little bitty, tiny, tiny words?
You want to read this?
It says, I'm testing y'all's eyesight right now today.
Something's word is
I
a
can
notice,
notice.
isn't it?
It's a notice, not for use, where seller owns fee simple title to land beneath unit. There can be a situation where a seller might actually own the land underneath their condominium. And if they do, you can't use this contract at all. But how do you like, Miss Linda, how nice and big that is there, right? That notice, whoa, it's huge, isn't it? You can see that way back there, Mr. Stahl, right?
Absolutely.
Clear as day.
Yeah, good eyesight.
Probably blinding you back there, right?
I am blind, I still can't see it.
The key thing
I
is
saw notice.
that on this situation is, I've had this happen before. Agent completes the entire condominium notice, or contract, completes the whole thing, ships it over to the other agent. The other agent says, no, 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 no. We actually had this happen not too long ago. No, 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 no. You cannot use that form. Why? Because the seller owns the land. And there is nothing in here. My agent was like, well, I'll just go down to special provisions and put seller or buyer gets land. No, that's not how this works. Can't do that. Okay?
I want the land.
That's practicing law.
Oh.
You can't do that. So what happens is you have to contact an attorney or broker, well, not broker lawyer committee, but the hotline, legal hotline, and they'll tell you sometimes. Or you contact the lender. You ask the lender, what do you want me to use? Because here's the problem. Miss Linda, let's run back over here. So this one says, not for use where seller owns fee simple title to land beneath unit. But Mr. Eugene, what does this notice right here say?
Not for use for condominium transactions.
Not for use for condominium transactions. Mr. Stahl, you see a problem here?
Yeah.
So this one you can't use,
How you can?
and this one you can't use.
So
You
what
just,
do
don't, you just don't have a form. You just tell them.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I want it.
Yeah.
I'll pay you this much.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
Yeah. This is
Contracts.
this is where that situation is where you end up. You have to actually send them to an attorney.
Okay. I was gonna say, don't tell me it's like the unapproved form for some
Nope.
reason or something stupid.
Nope. This is one of those situations. If the land conveys, you got to end up. You got to contact an attorney. Now let me ask you this, Mr. Stahl. Continue to play along with this on you. Ready? So, Mr. Grossman's purchasing a house, or a condominium, I'm sorry, that the private land underneath is going to convey. Okay? Can you use this form?
No.
Can you use this form?
No.
So you contact your broker. Your broker's does not answer your call. He's busy or she's busy.
Always, every time.
It's like Miss Linda, by the way. And so what ends up happening here,
4 and 1.
and so what happens here in this situation is that now you decide, well, I want to do what the professor said. I'm going to contact the lender. I'm going to contact Mr. Grossman. And Mr. Grossman says, we'll just use the 1 to 4 family. So Mr. Travis completes the 1 to 4 family, and he ships it over to Mr. Grossman. And Mr. Grossman goes in and does the loan off of this one.
No.
What's the problem here?
You just said
Not
not for use for condominium.
It can't be used for condominium transactions. Since it's a condominium transaction, we're in breach. Technically, in some situations, you relied on bad advice, and you might have actually relied on unauthorized practice of law.
I get it though, because then they sue you for special provisions, make you buy the land anyway, and your problem solved. If you were gonna buy it in the first
There you
place.
go.
Problem solved. I like it.
Big old thing, right?
Yeah, just get sued. I like it.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
So the key thing here, you see a big old mess, right? So this is that situation where you would actually say, if that happened, you tell them, hey, this is a very unique situation. There's not forms for it. Since there's not forms for it, I know your lender might have told you, because sometimes lenders love to jump in and put their nose in things that they don't belong in. They'll jump in and say, well, this is what you do right here. I've been doing it for 50 years. Well, if a lender tells you they've been doing it for 50 years and they tell you to use a form that's not supposed to be used, they're not being truthful to you. Okay? Not being truthful. An attorney needs to be brought in, an attorney needs to be reviewing it, and an attorney needs to draft it. But these are the situations, like I said, these are your 2 different forms that you need to be aware of. Okay, now let's look down here at 6D. Okay, let's jump on down to 6D. We're going to jump down here to 6D, and you'll notice under 6D we have title notices, but look at 6D here. We have objections. You'll notice there is no, in this situation, there is not going to be the full extent of a survey. Okay, you know, survey is not included in this one, but it is in this one. The reason being, Mr. Eugene, is why? The survey does what? It says the land, gives you the survey of the land. But you have no land, so there's no survey. Okay. All right, let's go to paragraph 12. Paragraph 12, there are your settlement expenses. Come over here. You got your settlement expenses. The difference, however, there are going to be certain expenses that are going to end up being allowed that would not be allowed in a normal transaction. You can read through those, but again, there are certain expenses that can and cannot be basically prorated or split, okay, or may not even apply. Again, 13. Now looky here. Where's that rollback tax? It's not here. Because why? We're talking about condominiums now. We're not talking about rollback taxes because you don't owe what? You don't own the land. Okay. And 14, look at that nice long casualty loss. Look at that. Versus this short one here. Okay. You'll notice, however, this is that casualty. So if something was to happen, there was an issue. These are their options, okay, that they have. So those are going to be your differences on this form. You have paragraphs 2, 6D, 12, 13, and 14. Okay, those are going to be your options. Now, the next one.
I was going to say just real quick. On my test, I do remember there was a question that asked, what do the owners of a condo own?
Yep.
And the answers, I can't remember all the answers, but it was something like the building, the land, I can't remember what the other one was, and then like the airspace between the walls. And the answer was technically you own the airspace between the walls, since the walls are neighboring the people next to you, you can't own the walls. So you just own the airspace within your unit, basically.
That's right. That is correct. Mr. Grossman, what do you see is the difference between paragraph 2 on the 1 to 4 family and the unimproved?
That's way shorter.
What's it missing? Do you see it? No,
No.
land's there.
Number 2, I don't see accessories or.
Do you see improvements or accessories
No.
or exclusions?
No.
So B, C, and D aren't there. Why? Because it's what?
Unimproved.
Unimproved.
Ain't nothing there.
Mr. Travis, what's that notice again here?
Not for use for condominium transactions.
There you go. Okay. Y'all online, I just have to say, the looks I'm getting in this class right now are priceless. Because I bet if I had y'all's videos on, they probably look the same.
I agree.
Miss Leela agrees with y'all.
Okay, on 2, you have property, on the unimproved, it says property and lot. On number 2, under 1 to 4, it says property, A, land, and then lot. I don't see land on that number 2.
Well, if you notice here, Miss
They
Linda,
don't have to specify land because
they
it's all.
got rid of all of this and deleted this right here. So they deleted all the blue and they just whoop, moved up.
It doesn't have to say land because that's all that's conveying is land.
All it's
They
conveying
don't have
is
to
the land.
specify, this is the land and these are the improvements. and all that stuff.
Right.
You still got lot,
Makes
block,
sense.
and have left address and all that too, so yeah. City, county.
Trust me, everybody that's listening. Everybody, y'all listen up, seriously. Yes, I know this seems like a lot. And to be honest, if I wrote this book, this would not be the small, tiny book. Like if y'all actually bought this book, it's probably no bigger than a child's night book, like something you can read a little kid at night. That's how tiny it is. The problem with it is the fact of the matter is, thankfully right now, you don't have to know all the details. Now, in the next 2-3 years, they're going to enhance this portion of it, okay? But the key thing is, like I tell everybody, is we need to make certain you have an understanding. Because ultimately, when you go take your licensing exam, it just makes sure you have a minimum knowledge of real estate. It's your broker's obligation to help you through this. Does that make sense? You don't have to be able to, when you finish my classes, sit down and write out all of these contracts by yourself. It's not going to happen. That's why, especially like in my office, I train my agents for their first 5.
Trust me, I can't do none of this. And I passed the test just fine.
Reason to do that, like Mr. Travis says, he still don't know all this, and that's normal. That's normal, guys and gals. Okay.
The office manager doesn't either.
But understand here, that's what my job as the broker is. That's my job to help you. Okay. And that's the reason also that I even have an attorney on staff. Because the fact is, you don't know, I have him do it. Okay. So again, the key thing is don't stress. Don't freak out. It's normal. I'm just giving you the differences. All they're wanting you to know right now is what chapter or what paragraphs are their differences. That's it. That's all they're asking. They're not asking, we want you to quote exactly what verbatim what paragraph 2 is in the unimproved property contract versus the paragraph 2 in the 1-4 family. No, that's impossible. Okay? Not what we're asking. We're just asking which paragraphs are different. That's all we're mainly looking at. Okay? So again, mainly just like your slideshow, I could have sat here and I could have tonight just said, okay, 1-4 family differs from the unimproved property contract by paragraph 2, 6D, and 7 and 13. I could have done that. But I'm trying to point them out so that you see the differences. Okay? So, in regards to 6D, okay, we already talked about 6D, I believe. Yes, we did. I believe we did. Those were your objections and all. That's where we talk about survey. In regards to 7, let's move down here. You'll notice here that we, in this situation, we're back to that completion of repairs. We're back to the notices. The seller's disclosure, however, is down here versus over here, it's B. Okay, so there's differences. Don't need to know all the detail, just need to know the differences. 13. Again, prorations here. Over here, prorations with rollback taxes. Okay, that's going to be the unimproved. Okay, now, before I move on, that is our last form there. Does anybody have questions on the forms? We've got one more slide to cover, but before I jump off, does anybody have questions on the forms or what might be text?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What was before the 13? There was another one you pointed out. It was something D.
Number 7 over
Okay.
here. Let me go back right here. Number 7. And if we go back over here, let me find it again for you. You look at here on number 7, we're talking about acceptance.
Okay.
Okay, so there is your differences between those two. Now again, there is, if you notice, this is still in here, but it's G. But what they basically got rid of was that acceptance provision here. Actually, I think they actually moved it to B. Actually, they didn't get rid of it; they just moved it up to B. So they just reorganized it, is what they did. Does that make sense?
Right. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Anybody else have questions? All right, so let's jump back. Oh, wrong one. Try to move this back over here. Let's move that. back to present. And our last one. And we're almost done, y'all. I know that's a lot this evening. But again, we're just covering the content. Okay? The main thing is, guess what? We're looking at the overall. What are we trying to look at? We're trying to look at the prep course. The prep course is where you want to focus. Okay, I'm just giving you an overview, but the prep course is where you want to actually focus. I will tell you, when you get your real estate license, most real estate brokerages, they actually spend an entire class. They will have an hour to a 2-hour lecture in their training rooms going over just one of those contracts. So when we did tonight, they would have ended up, guys and gals, they would have actually ended up probably spent an entire day, 8 hours, maybe 9-hour day, going through every one of those contracts with about an hour to 2 hours on each contract. The reason being in this situation is that we're going to have multiple differences. Another thing is that I say that you don't need to memorize it is because since I've been licensed for over a decade, I've been licensed. Guess what ends up happening in this situation? They have changed the form. It used to be 8 pages. It is now 10 pages, possibly going into 11 pages. Okay, so it does change. You don't have to know every single thing. You just need to know the ones that are going to be different. Okay, now in that situation is you want to make certain that as you're going through these different things, you want to ensure that as you are doing these things, you want to make certain that as we're looking at these, you want to notice the rollback taxes. Okay, you will notice that as you went through these, the rollback taxes, they were addressed in the new home contract, both complete and incomplete, the farm and ranch contract, and the unimproved contract. But let me ask you this question, okay? What ends up happening in this situation is you've got to make certain that when you go through this, we want to make certain that we are going through and having these rollback taxes. So ends up, we got to be able to differentiate between these different ones. You may end up having, for example, the condominium. Are you going to have in this situation, when we're dealing with this, is there condominium transactions in the rollback taxes? No. No, because why? There's no land. So we're not going to have rollback taxes. They can be assessed when the property zoning changes, and property is going to be responsible, or party's going to be responsible for the change in usage, is responsible for the tax when used in a TREC contract. Now, the key point here that we all want to make certain of, that everybody has a working knowledge of, is we want to make certain that as we're going through these different elements, we want to understand that as we go through these rollback taxes, understanding that when you get these contracts, don't automatically assume, however, that it's going to be split 50-50. Okay? A lot of people just assume that it's going to be split. There can be exceptions to those rules. Okay? There can end up being exceptions to the rules. There can be exceptions to different situations. But again, rollback taxes is one of those elements. Okay? They're one of the elements that can be included. Now, again, like I said, all you need to end up knowing, let me go back here. So, number one, like I said, these are the promulgated contracts. If y'all wanted to kind of write a note, you could. I want to kind of summarize real quick in our last few minutes. So on this first slide, these 6 are your only, rephrase that, these 6 are the only contracts, period. Okay? So you are only going to utilize 6 contracts with 90% of the time 1 to 4 family. Does that make sense? So about only 10% of the time you're going to use the bottom. But I can tell you, in my entire 10 years I've practiced, actually 11 now, 11 years, I have not yet once utilized new home contract incomplete, new home contract complete. Why do you think that is, Miss Linda?
Because it's new construction.
If Mr. Grossman's a builder, do you think he makes a lot of money? Yeah.
And depending on where.
Yeah, he makes a ton of money. Mr. Grossman, if you make a ton of money, I got a question for you. Are you going to use some standardized form that lawyers made up for the benefit of a consumer? Or are you going to go have your attorneys draft up a contract for your business?
I have my attorney's drafted.
Why are you going to have your attorneys drafted?
Because it's going to be in my favor.
Because you're going to write it in your favor and not in the consumer's favor. So, of course, when you send a client, one of your agents, to a particular builder, it's going to end up, they're not going to use a new home contract. The only time I can tell you that I've ever heard of these two being used, the new home contract, incomplete and complete, was when the builder was brand new. The builder was just starting. Now, they didn't have attorneys. They were building their first 1 or 2 houses. Okay, we'll use those forms. Okay? Now, that could be a scary sign, by the way, if you're a real estate agent, because you're like, oh, this guy doesn't have an attorney in-house. But in the same situation, as it comes back to that question that Miss Linda always asks me all the time, is, well, what is this, Justin? This doesn't look like a promulgated form. Well, it's not, because it was wrote by the builder's own in-house staff, their attorneys, that ended up drafting that. Well, that doesn't meet approval. Yes, it does. If you remember from way back in law of contracts, what did we say? The principal, can either be buyer or seller, to draft their own contracts and both party agrees to it. Okay? So the only time that we are concerned is if let me go back. If I end up in this situation, if I'm the one drafting this up, you see what I'm saying? As an agent, if I'm working for a builder, say Mr. Grossman's a builder, and I've come to work for him not as an employee but as an agent, then I'm going to most likely recommend that he ends up utilizing these forms because I'm acting as an agent. Okay? But if I, as an employee of Mr. Grossman, I can use whatever form that Mr. Grossman tells me. Okay? Another thing is, so again, like I said, you only need to know these 6 forms. But in real life, you're only going to use probably 4 of the 6. Okay? What do I need to know from everything else that you spoke about tonight, Mr. Knowles? Well, here we go. Everything in that 3rd bullet right there you need to know. Okay? So you want to highlight new home construction contract, incomplete. I need to know those differences. Next one. Need to know that new home, basically knock out bullet 2. We just scratch through bullet 2 and keep everything else. Same thing here. Scratch out bullet 2, keep everything else. Scratch out bullet 2, keep everything else. Scratch out bullet 2, keep everything else. Okay? In rollback taxes, like we said, you need to understand these are only going to apply to contracts that are what? Contracts that are going to include land. If they don't include land, doesn't matter. Okay? Which means condominiums are not going to include. Again, there can be assessments that can be against it. If a property zoning goes from residential to commercial, guess what? Taxes do what? Go up. If it goes commercial to residential, they'll go down. Okay? Again, the party responsible for the change is the usage is responsible for the tax when using a tract contract. So if I'm using it, I'm responsible for the tax. If I'm not using it, I'm not responsible for it. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So the next class, we're going to talk about the addendas and other forms. So what we discussed tonight was the contracts. When we come back, we're going to discuss the addendas. Okay? Now, I'm telling you, tonight, unfortunately, was the easy part. Because, as Miss Linda can tell you, there are a ton of addendas. Okay? There are a ton of them. However, coming back to this, do you need to know verbatim, word for word, every single addendum as well as everything included in it? No, you don't. Okay? The key thing I want to keep y'all to remember, in the back of your mind, the key thing, guys and gals, is it is the broker's obligation to train you this. Do not freak out by saying, oh my gosh, I got to know all this stuff right now. It's impossible. Stop worrying about that. Okay? You're going to get through this. Okay? All right. With that being said, give me just a minute so we can stop the session. Hold on.